take any crazy idea. I don't know, it's hard to make up a very crazy one thing, witches or something like that, and you tell about what people used to believe in witches, and of course nobody believes in witches now, and you think, how could they believe in witches? Then you turn around and you say, let's see, what witches do we believe in now? What ceremonies do we do? Every morning we brush our teeth. What is the evidence that brushing your teeth does us any good in cavities? So you start wondering, are we all, imagine as the Earth turns on the orbit, there's an edge between light and dark. And along that edge, all the people along that edge, are doing the same ritual for no good reason. Just like in the Middle Ages, they had other rituals. And you try to picture this perpetual line of toothbrushes going around the Earth. It's to take the world from another point of view. Now, it may well be that brushing teeth is a very good thing because it gets rid of cavities, and you can find out whether it does or it doesn't by trying to find out. Now, you can ask your dentist, and he says, of course. And you say, how about evidence? I have not found the evidence from dentists because they just learned it in school. Now, I'm not trying to argue that it's good or bad to brush teeth. What I'm trying to argue for is to think about things from a new point of view. You see, I have had in my life a number of pleasant experiences. The earliest one, when I was a kid, I invented a problem for myself, the sum of the powers of the integers. And in trying to get the formula for it, I developed a certain set of numbers that formula for which I couldn't get. And I discovered later that those were known as the Bernoulli numbers, and discovered in 1739. So I was up to 1739 when I was about 14, you see. And then a little later I discovered something. I find out I just invented a thing called, which we now call operator calculus. And that was invented in 1890 something. You see, I was inventing things that came later and later. But the moment when I began to realize that I was now working on something new was when I read about quantum electrodynamics at the time, and I read a book and I learned about it. For example, I read Dirac's book, and he had these problems that nobody knew how to solve. They were described there. I couldn't understand the book very well because I really wasn't up to it. But there in the last paragraph at the end of the book it said, some new ideas are here needed. And so there I was, some new ideas were needed. Okay, so I started to think of new ideas.
Richard Feynman, Nobel Prize winner, and his son Carl stepped gingerly down the wet cobbles of Millbank, high in the Yorkshire Pennines. Feynman, professor of physics at the California Institute of Technology, retreats to this remote village near his wife's home for a special purpose. It's here he finds the time and solitude to sift the ideas that have made him the most feared and original mind in modern physics. Feynman is in the forefront of one of the oldest and most intriguing games of hide-and-seek in science, finding the ultimate constituents of the world. In this search, Feynman is a celebrated maverick who is encouraged by his father, a New York clothing salesman, to confront conventional wisdom.
One Sunday, all the kids were all walking in little parties with their fathers in the woods. Then the next Monday, we were playing in a field, and the kid said to me, say, what's that bird? What's the name of it? Do you know the name of that bird? I says, I haven't the slightest idea. He said, well, it's a brown-throated thrush. He says, your father doesn't teach you anything. But my father had already taught me about the names of birds. Once we walked and he says, that's a brown-throated thrush. He says, know what the name of that bird is? A brown-throated thrush. In German, it's called a Flügelflügel. In Chinese, it's called a Qinglongtong. In Japanese, a Tahatahara, and so on. And when you know all the names in every language of that bird, you know nothing, but absolutely nothing about the bird. And then we would go on and talk about the pecking and the feathers. So I had learned already that names don't constitute knowledge. It's knowing the name of something. That's caused me a certain trouble since, because I refuse to learn the name of anything. So when someone comes in and says, you got any explanation for the Fitz-Cronin experiment? I says, what's that? He says, you know, that the long-lived K-meson disintegrates into 2 pies. Oh, yes, now I know. But I never know the names of things. What he forgot to tell me was that knowing the names of things is useful if you want to talk to somebody else. So you tell him what you're talking about.
But the basic principle of knowing about something rather than just knowing its name is something that you stuck to, is it?
Yes, of course. We have to learn. These are kind of disciplines in the field of science that you have to learn. That to know when you know and when you don't know, and what it is you know and what it is you don't know. And it's you got to be very careful not to confuse yourself.
How else did he try and
progress?
mold your methods of thinking, the way you looked at the world?
Well, we had a lot of little games. Like he would say at the dinner table, we'd think of some little problem. And he'd say, suppose you were a Martian, we were Martians, and we came down to this Earth, and we'd look at it from the outside. And that, I can't explain exactly what he meant, but there's a way of looking something anew, as if you never saw it before, for the first time, and asking questions about it as if you were different. For instance, if you would ask, later I did some little amusing research for a paper in college on sleep. But it started with a question of his kind. Suppose you were a Martian who never slept. They didn't have sleep. You didn't have to sleep. And you came down to this Earth and you saw these people had this funny property that every day for a certain amount of time they had to lie down and become unconscious. And then the natural question would be, how does it feel to get unconscious? What happens to you? Ideas run along and suddenly they stop? Or do they just run more and more slowly? But what happens to your ideas? How does it feel to become unconscious? So I tried to answer the question. What happens when you become unconscious?
But you find that these days, you still, when you're faced with a particularly difficult problem, when you're absolutely stuck, you tend to say, let's look at it like a Martian would look at it. And
sometimes. There are lots of things that people did. For example, Maxwell put the equations together. Faraday, he formulated the equations mathematically with some model in his head. And then Dirac got his answer by just writing and guessing an equation. And other people got their answer, like in relativity, got the idea by looking at principles of symmetry. Now all these methods, Heisenberg got his quantum mechanics by thinking only talk about the things that you can measure. Now all of these ideas, we should only talk about things that we can measure. Try to define things in terms of only things you measure. Or let's formulate the equation mathematically. Or let's guess the equation. Or all these things are tried all the time. Look for symmetries. All that stuff is tried. All that stuff, when we're going against the problem, we do all that. That's very useful. But we all know that. That's what we learn in the physics classes, how to do that. But the new problem, where we're stuck because all those methods don't work. If any of those methods would have worked, we would have gone through there. So when we get stuck in a certain place, it's a place where history will not repeat herself. And that's makes it even more exciting, because whatever we're going to look at the method and the trick and the way it's going to look is going to be very different than anything that we've seen before, because we've used all the methods from before. So, therefore, a thing like the history of the idea is an accident of how things actually happen. And if I want to turn the history around and try to get a new way of looking at it, it doesn't make any difference. I don't care. The only thing that the real test in physics is experiment, and history is fundamentally irrelevant.
The most enduring legacy from his father was not just learning to question the physical world, but an enthusiasm for the inquiry, which at 54 Feynman still shares today.
It has to do with curiosity. It has to do with people wondering what makes something do something. And then to discover that if you try to get answers, that they're related to each other. The things that make the wind make the waves, and the motion of water is like the motion of air, is like the motion of sand. The fact that things have common features turns out more and more universal. What we're looking for is how everything works, and how everything is, what makes everything work. And what happens first in the history is we discover the things that are on the face of it obvious. And then gradually we ask more questions, and then we dig in a little deeper to things that we can just we need to do a little more complicated experiment to find out about. But it's curiosity as to where we are, what we are. It's very much more exciting to discover we're on a ball, half of it sticking upside down. It's spinning around in space. It's a mysterious force which holds us on. It's going around a great big glob of gas that's burning fueled by a fire that's completely different than the fire, any fire we can make. Well, now we can make that fire, nuclear fire. But that's a much more exciting story to many people than the tales which other people used to make up who worried about the universe, that we were living on the back of a turtle or something like that. They were wonderful stories, but the truth is so much more remarkable. And so what's the pleasure in physics is that, for me, is that as it's revealed, the truth is so remarkable, so amazing. And I have this disease, and many other people who have studied far enough to begin to understand a little of how things work are fascinated by it. And this fascination drives them on to such an extent that they've been able to convince governments and so on to keep supporting them in this investigation that the race is making into its own environment.
As a theoretical physicist, Feynman doesn't have a laboratory, and he finds family relaxation helps him to concentrate. In recent years, he's been concerned with the long-asked, almost childlike question, what are things really made of? What makes up the world we see around us? Have we at last come to the foundation stone from which we can make anything, a tree, a human being? Or must we go on looking at smaller and smaller pieces and going deeper and deeper into a bottomless pit? Feynman is trying to knit together our scattered knowledge of the smallest pieces of matter to see whether they fit a pattern. The problem, although fundamentally important to all branches of science, seems far removed from everyday reality.
The world is strange. The whole universe is very strange. But see, when you look at the details and you find out that the rules are very simple of the game, the mechanical rules by which you can figure out exactly what's going to happen when the situation is simple. It's again this chess game business. If you were in just a corner where only a few pieces are involved, you can work out exactly what's going to happen. And you can always do that when there's only a few pieces. So you know you understand it. And yet, in the real game, it's so many pieces you can't figure out what's going to happen. So there was a kind of hierarchy of different complexities. It's hard to believe. It's incredible. In fact, most people don't believe that the behavior of, say, me, one yak, and you nodding and all this stuff is the result of lots and lots of atoms all obeying these very simple rules come out that it evolves into such a creature that the billion years of life with its experiences has produced a thing with prongs that stick out like this and so on. There's such a lot in the world, there's so much distance between the fundamental rules and the final phenomena that it's almost unbelievable that the final variety of phenomena can come from such a steady operation of such simple rules.
But you've had to build the most complex scaffolding to find out the simple rules.
But it is not complicated. It's just a lot of it. And if you'd start at the beginning, which nobody wants to do, I mean, you come in to me now in an interview and you're asking me about the latest discoveries that have been made. Nobody ever asks about a simple, ordinary phenomenon in the street. You know, like, what about those colors or something like that? We have a nice interview, explain all about the colors, butterfly wings, whole big deal. You don't care about that. You want the big final result. Instead, it's going to be complicated because I am at the end of 400 years of very effective method of finding things out about the world.
In the search for the ground rules of the physical world, John Dalton worked out a comprehensive explanation over 150 years ago. He assumed that everything we see is made out of tiny atoms, that they're immutable and indestructible, and that atoms of different chemical elements like lead or copper have different weights. Too small to be observed, the atoms combine with each other to form complicated molecules, and vast collections of these molecules are recognizable to us as tables, trees, or whatever. But in the final analysis, atoms were to be the smallest constituents of matter, ultimate and unchangeable. At the turn of the century, we evolved our present picture of the atom, light electrons surrounding a heavy central core or nucleus. Once the atom was shown to be destructible, attention turned to the nucleus, and during the 30s it was found that bombarding one nucleus with another led to a release of energy and the breaking up of the nuclei. This process, which takes place in nuclear accelerators, is photographed in a liquid bubble chamber.
You take a liquid hydrogen or some other liquid, and expand it so that it's ready to boil. You low temperature and you decrease the pressure, it's ready to boil, and it has to form bubbles somewhere. And it's any little piece of dirt or any little disturbance, it'll form a bubble. In that condition, if a particle comes flying through from some machine, it leaves a track. It tears up the atoms along where electrons are knocked off the atoms along its track. And we can't see that. But when the gas tries to expand, when the liquid tries to boil, The bubbles form around these charged particles which are left, so it leaves a string of bubbles.